So the Daily Beast has some reporting from inside the Trump White House that should be shocking here, but at this point, it won't even be a blip in the radar because this is going to be eclipsed by about 13 other issues or gaffes that the media tends to focus on. So take a look at this. They say, since the 2016 presidential campaign, Donald Trump's aides and advisors have tried to convince him of the importance of tackling the national debt. Sources close to the president say he has repeatedly shrugged it off, implying that he doesn't have to worry about the money owed to America's creditors, currently about $21 trillion, because he won't be around to shoulder the blame when it becomes even more untenable. The friction came to a head in early 2017 when senior officials offered Trump charts and graphics laying out the numbers and showing a hockey stick spike in the national debt in the not too distant future. In response, Trump noted that the data suggested the debt would reach a critical mass only after his possible second term in office. Quote, "Yeah, but I won't be here," the president bluntly said, according to a source who was in the room when Trump made this comment during discussions on the debt. So there's a lot to say about this. I mean, first and foremost, obviously this flies directly in the face of everything he said, not only on the campaign trail, but even before he ran for president. You know, I was recently watching older Donald Trump late-night talk show interviews because I'm a glutton for punishment. And, you know, it was in the 80s, and he's sitting with Larry King, and he's talking to Jay Leno in some of them. He's talking to David Letterman. He's talking to Conan O'Brien. And what's interesting is he's always, even when he's just out there promoting The Apprentice, as he did in the, the early 2000s, and I don't know if it was on in the late 90s. I don't think it was. Well, when he was out there promoting The Apprentice in the 2000s, he always does, like, he will talk about whatever bullshit they want to talk about on the late night show, but then also he always gets political. He's always been political to one extent or another. And one of the things that you see as a recurring theme going all the way back to the 1980s is that he fearmongers about the national debt. And he talks about how, the U.S., we're getting taken advantage of, we're being destroyed on trade. He loves to beat up on China. Kind of hilarious because he outsources his own jobs to at least a dozen different countries. So for a guy who seems to be so concerned about free trade, I mean, he engages in it, and he's doing the exact thing that he hammers away on. But really, the national debt is one of those issues where, for all these years, he's been hammering away on it and talking about how it's a huge problem and talking about how we have to get serious and we have to address it because it could lead to the downfall of our nation and blah, 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 blah. Well, now, obviously, he's in power, and it just immediately totally flipped on it. Yeah, whatever, if something happens, I won't be here. But here's the thing. So you could go after him for the hypocrisy and going back on what he said, but let's be honest, this is every single president of both parties. So, like, the idea that it's unique to him, it's just that Donald Trump is actually, in this instance, being more honest today than other presidents have been, where they might continue to pretend like they care deeply about the debt and the deficit, but they're going to do nothing to address it. So, and also, listen, there's a point to be made that we should all be celebrating this because it actually is true that this isn't as big an issue as it's made out to be. If you listen to modern monetary theory economists, they'll tell you that since we issue our own currency, it's not the end of the world if you run deficits. In fact, what would lead to inflation is political instability is usually linked to inflation. It's not just the fact that if you're running this debt and these deficits, that's going to lead to inflation. So since we control our own currency, everybody fear-mongering over this issue has a fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of economics. And it'd be one thing if, your economy is basically being controlled, like Greece's economy is really not sovereign because it's being controlled by the EU. And so when they have a debt crisis and then austerity is forced upon them, like, that's a huge issue. But we control our own currency, so it's not all the people on the far right who fearmonger about the debt and the deficit. Really, ultimately, what it ends up being is a Trojan horse argument so that they can cut entitlements. So that's something that people need to get their head around. You'll notice something. Every single time a character on the right talks about the debt and the deficit, they immediately connect it to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. It's a guarantee. 10 out of 10 times if they bring up the debt and the deficit, they immediately go to that. Oh, my unfunded entitlement. We can't do this as far as I can see. We need to reform them. And then they have all these bullshit arguments where they say we're going to reform entitlements, but functionally what they want to do is cut entitlements. So if they're using this argument about, oh my God, look at the national debt to try to get Trump to sign on to deep cuts of Social Security and Medicare, well, then you should be happy that his response is basically, yeah, but I won't be here, so who cares about the debt and the deficit? So now, again, I'm not saying he's taking a principled stand because he really does want to protect those programs, because I don't think he gives a fuck, and I don't think he has any ideology. But the fact of the matter is, this is something that's very common for presidents to do. And also, the framing of the article goes on, and it really actually pisses me off, because they make it seem like Donald Trump is breaking a long tradition of Republican presidents caring about the deficit. No, he's not. George W. Bush, record debt and deficit. Ronald Reagan, record debt and deficit. They always have the rhetoric of, oh, we care about this issue and it's so important. But then they blow up the debt and the deficit. And they blow it up for dumb reasons. It'd be one thing if you're running a giant, if you're adding to the debt and you're running a giant annual deficit because, hey, we just did this awesome infrastructure bill that's going to give millions of people jobs and make our economy a green economy. That'd be one thing, but they're not even doing that. They're basically adding to the debt and the deficit and giving giant tax cuts to the ultra wealthy and to corporations. So again, you always have to scratch beneath the surface, read between the lines, because the devil is always in the details. And what you'll find is whenever these characters on the right talk about the issue of the national debt or the annual deficit, they always 100% of the time will link it to, we got to cut entitlements, we got to cut Social Security, we got to cut Medicare, we got to cut Medicaid. What are we doing? I mean, we don't have a choice. We have to reform them to save the programs, which is all weasel words. They can't just come up front and tell you exactly what they want to do, which is cut these programs. For some of them, flat out privatize them. For some of them, eliminate them. So keep all of that in mind. Even though he's a rank hypocrite for flipping on this issue, if the end result is we don't get deep cuts to Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, okay, whatever. You take the hypocrisy and you say, we lucked out that he doesn't actually believe in anything and he's telling his advisors to piss off. It's amazing how they just passed a tax bill that massively increased the deficit and will add on to the national debt, and they act like they didn't just do that, and they turn around and go, oh, well, it looks like we have to do something about this. You just added to it. What do you mean you got to do something about it? Because again, it's a Trojan horse to cut entitlement programs. So don't believe them. Listen, if you really wanted to, like what I would do if I was in his position, and of course I wouldn't be because I would never even have those fucking advisors. He's got insane right-wing neocon advisors, Goldman Sachs advisors. But I would say, oh, okay, you want to cut the debt and the deficit? Interesting. Put a plan on my desk about cutting our 900 military bases down to 200. Put a plan on my desk about cutting our military spending at the very least 40%. Put a plan on my desk about eliminating corporate welfare to already profitable corporations. Put a memo on my desk that talks about our bailouts of Wall Street and how much they cost and how we can get more of that money back. There are things you could do where you actually can be deficit neutral and not add more to the deficit and actually do massively popular left-wing programs, but that would require reallocation of funding, which, of course, the people's hair would be on fire if you talk about, and by that I mean the establishment's hair would be on fire if you talk about, using our means to give people healthcare, give people education, give people daycare, paid vacation time, an infrastructure deal, things of that nature. So Donald Trump is a massive, gross, disgusting hypocrite, but in a weird sense, we lucked out that he has a non-ideology on this front, because I guarantee you, if it was, say, Mike Pence, let's say Mike Pence was president, and all of his Goldman Sachs advisors come in fear-mongering about the debt and the deficit, Mike Pence maybe would not say, he might, because all other Republican presidents said, I don't care about it, but I don't think he'd say, yeah, but I won't be here. I think Mike Pence would go, oh, I need to perform this civil duty to everybody in the country, and we will cut Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. I will make your grandma poverty-stricken so that I can fix the deficit. And that wouldn't be a good thing. That would be a terrible thing. So, the final point here is I'm amazed at how easy it is for people in the government, in this case, top officials in the Trump administration. I'm amazed at how easy it is for them to manipulate the media. Because literally all they had to do was go to the Daily Beast and concern troll them about Trump and backing away from doing something about the debt and the deficit. And the media immediately fell for it and framed the entire conversation from that right-wing perspective. See, this is another example of what I call resisting from the right. The Democrats have been doing this a lot to Trump. This is an example of the media doing it, where they're saying, he doesn't even want to reduce the national debt and the deficit. Man, isn't that so stupid? He should really want to do that. Well, then they don't even realize they're doing is they're giving into a right-wing framing. The implication of the argument is, well, obviously it's the right thing to do to reduce the debt and the deficit, and how are these people going to do it? By cutting entitlements. So they don't even realize that they're giving into that right-wing framing and not challenging it. Now, again, as I said, if you want to go after him for the hypocrisy of it and saying, hey, you used to say that and now you say this, I'm totally fine with that. But you need to add context, and you need to add, well, if he was being consistent, he actually would end up cutting those programs, and that would be a terrible idea. So maybe we lucked out in the sense that he's saying, don't worry about it. And, an interesting thing if you want to read more about this is they've been predicting for a long time that, oh my God, Japan, they're going to have such a giant crisis. Their economy is going to implode, and it's going to be specifically because of their national debt. And they've been saying this for literally decades. Like, oh my God, they're in so much trouble. And it hasn't come to pass. There hasn't been this giant issue as a result of the national debt in Japan. Why? They issue their own currency. So all of the debt fearmongers, I think they fundamentally misunderstand economics. And that's not me saying I know everything about economics, but it is me saying that they're empirically wrong about so many things, and their assumptions are lazy, and mainstream media just parrots them as if it's a given. So it's interesting to see what they say versus what the reality is. So, but anyway, here you go. Here's Donald Trump being a massive hypocrite, but in a weird way, we may have lucked out.